The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
First off, let me say I am very pleased you decided to come on the show. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time.
I appreciate you inviting me on, Joe. I heard that Chlamydia Harris declined your offer. I think she's going to regret that decision.
I have to start off by asking you about all these UFOs and drones that are flying around over New Jersey and California. What is your take on all of this? I mean, are these things ours or the Chinese, or are they legitimate UFOs for outer space somewhere?
That's an interesting question, Joe, and I have to say I never really gave it much thought until I got into office, and I discovered that the military and the CIA had these programs they call remote viewing. There's these guys that can see into the future and really anywhere in the universe. It's really quite a phenomenal thing that they do, and with the wacky guests you've had on your show, you're probably already aware of these guys.
Yes, I am aware of the remote viewers that the government has used, and a couple of them have been on the show before. I know that Sean Ryan has had both Skip Atwater and Joe McMonigle on his show, and their stories are pretty incredible. But getting back to the question at hand, what's your take on all these drones?
Well, what I can say is that I have been briefed about them, but the details of those briefings are pretty tight-lipped, so I can't say more than that. But they are over New Jersey, after all, and Jersey is pretty much a shithole, so who gives a fuck anyway? I mean, other than maybe Bruce Springsteen.
Now, wait a second, Donald. There are some great people from Jersey. I mean, Frank Sinatra was from New Jersey, after all, and he's an icon of the entertainment industry.
Yeah, okay, Joe, it's your story, and you can tell it however you want. And by the way, don't call me Donald, call me Mr. President, okay?
Technically, you're not the president yet. You're the president-elect, so the title of Mr. President still belongs to Joe Biden, even though that guy can barely walk or finish a complete sentence without mumbling. He still is the president until January 20th.
Well, you're right about that, Joe, and I have to say, even though I don't really like the guy and disagree with virtually all of his policies, the way his party screwed him over was horrible. Then they brought in that crazy broad Chlamydia Harris. What a mistake that was. That whole thing was orchestrated by Barack Obama, and early on they were saying that Gavin Newsom, or as I like to call him, Gavin Gruesome, was going to take over for Sleepy Joe, and his Aunt Nancy Pelosi was trying really hard to get him in there on the ticket. But I put a stop to all that shit, and I told Pelosi that if she kept it up, I'd have her locked in a room with my rancid farts pumped in there 24 hours a day. Now, she knows from personal experience that you don't want to mess with my farts. They are monumental. So she backed off pretty quick. Then her husband got beat over the head by that nut job with a hammer, and they tried to blame that on me, but I don't know how to use a hammer, so that threat went nowhere.
Yeah, I heard about that. Hey, what about that story where they said you were stinking up the courtroom with big, wet-ripping farts?
Oh, yeah, that was true. I ate like 3 cans of beans before I went there, and I got that whole place reeking like Trump doo-doo. The prosecutor nearly passed out from the stench, and I was loving it.
I want to shift gears a bit here and ask you about your thoughts on the use of psychedelics as a treatment for veterans suffering from PTSD and others afflicted by addiction and mental disorders. The drug Ibogaine has shown amazing results for people suffering from these afflictions, and back in the early 70s, President Nixon had this drug placed on the Schedule I list, even though it has no harmful side effects if administered properly, and it is non-addictive. I recently interviewed ex-Governor Rick Perry and Brian Hubbard, and the testimony they gave was very compelling, and I wanted to know if you're going to have Robert Kennedy Jr. look into this to see if it can be implemented as a treatment for these afflictions. And if so, what sort of time frame would we be looking at for that to happen?
Oh, Jesus, Joe, you're asking some pretty tough questions here. I thought this was going to be all softball stuff.
Well, we have a situation in our country where we were at war for over 20 years because of the policies of Bush and Dick Cheney, and that has resulted in untold thousands of men and women suffering from severe PTSD. Ibogaine appears to be a very useful treatment for this.
As you may already know, Joe, I have always said that I just don't get it as far as the whole military thing goes, but as Commander-in-Chief, it is my job to ensure that our military gets what they need to do their job. And the veterans that have served our great country faithfully should not be forgotten and discarded like some old worn-out shoe. I think that Tulsi Gabbard may well be the best choice to see if these kinds of treatments are the best path forward in that regard. She does have a lot of military and medical work in her background. And with her as a part of my administration, I'm sure we can find a way to determine what the best choice may be.
I have to ask you about these 2 ex-military guys that carried out the crazy attacks on New Year's Day. I mean, the one guy blew up a truck at one of your hotels in Vegas, and the other guy down in New Orleans mowed down a bunch of people with a rental truck before having a shootout with the Kyle. with the cops. And then he got taken out by them like something out of Bonnie and Clyde.
Well, from what I have been told, the guy in New Orleans got radicalized by that ISIS bullshit, and he was apparently trying to make it to a church to wipe out a bunch more people. And that grandma police chief they have down there isn't doing a very good job of policing that city. And I think maybe we'll have to have the Justice Department look into all of that. Now, this other guy in Vegas who blew up a Tesla truck was apparently burned beyond recognition, and there are some who have asserted that he was a drone specialist guy in the military, which is odd considering all the drone stuff going on elsewhere. And some people are saying the guy in the truck might not even be that same guy. He had a gunshot to the head from some kind of 50 caliber hand-held elephant gun or something like that. And Elon told me that those trucks can be self-driven, so there's a lot of mystery surrounding that one. The sheriff out there in Vegas and the FBI have their hands full trying to figure all this shit out. And let's not forget about the mega nut job guy who had all the pipe bombs and explosives stored at his house. I heard he had some nitroglycerin kind of shit in his freezer, and he had little kids that had access to that freezer. I mean, that is just batshit crazy. I'm all for the MAGA movement, but we can't be having people out there making bombs so they can destroy buildings or create public terror. I think everybody should just stay home and watch reruns of The Apprentice.
Well, look, we have covered a lot of ground here today, and I really appreciate your stopping by. I know you're a very busy man, and taking the time to discuss this stuff goes a long way in the public perception of who you are and how you'll govern our nation. There are a lot of people out there that are not now and may never be on board with you being elected again. But the fact of the matter is you did get elected again, and people should back their leaders regardless of party affiliation. At least that's my view of it.
Well, I got to tell you, Joe, I wasn't really all that keen about coming here to Austin with all the woke bullshit dripping off the walls everywhere. But I enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully we've made some headway with the non-believers out there. I am your president, after all, so deal with it.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Trained by day, Joe Rogan.